night a bitch nigga shot a real nigga. But we don't make no diss records, we just deal with it. Plus I be going through a lot, I never talk about it. And they using niggas songs in court, so I can't talk about it. Rap niggas think I'm dumb, like I don't see the play. I let them think they got the ups, then get them out the way. On FaceTime, my brother telling me he shot my mama, telling me to chill, but I know he seen that nigga face. But that's enough about that part. Talking about respect, well, it's a must about that part. Playing with my money, well, then it's up about that part. Cause when it's time to play ball, don't give a fuck about that part. They know I'm that nigga when they see me. Her man crush been a hater, and her little brother won't beat me. Her friend been on my dick since I was passing out CDs. Her baby daddy a marker, and her boyfriend probably a weenie. 3,300 on my book bag. Let some niggas in the past, but I don't look back. Shit kinda different, I ain't the man that I was. I seen death in too many forms, and I ain't never really shook that. Don't let him rock you to sleep, true colors better believe him. I know that God got me, but I be riding with my reaper. Praying with my kids, and even then I got my heater. And I be stepping so hard, this hoes in $1,000 sneakers. Take your bitch when I meet her, and you ain't seen her in about 3 days. Knew I was a threat, I passed that stick like a relay. Spin it back to back, it's like a motherfucking replay. Turn your son into a bitch when I shoot, I think I'm D-Wade. Told him I'm a savage, if I want it, I'ma have it. Playing with my lettuce, cook your head like a cabbage. Tell them that I'm rich and I'm solid, that's the advantage. Bitch, bad kids, fresh little nigga, you can't stand it. Tell them big checks, yardsticks, not a roof. All I smoke is ops and I don't never smoke a hookah. Looking for a blessing that's worth it, Jesus and Judas. Tell them niggas game 6, my whole team full of shooters. I slide on a nigga like a motherfucking flip-flop. Pressure on your homie and I promise he a flip-flop. Talking that wookie-woo, something. I know the police listen, so I ain't really saying nothing. I know these niggas envy, they can't manage how they feel. Jealousy's for bitches, you niggas pussy for real. A nigga get the drop and he happen to shoot. First we heal up and get back. We ain't going on the shirt, I swear to God. That wookie-woo, something. I know the police listen, so I ain't saying nothing. Talking that wookie-woo, something. Nigga cock back and aim and leave you bleeding where you running, swear to God, nigga.
What's the deal, y'all? What's the deal? Rich Roberts, I've been in TNN Trap News Network. Back in the same, like cracking the same here at TNN Trap News Network. Good news you can use. Good knowledge you ain't thinking nobody's college. News you can use. You ain't thinking nobody's college. Knowledge you ain't thinking nobody's college. Tap in with that. Tap in to make sure you are in fact tapped in with that. Tap in. You feel me? Notification bell hit all. You want to be a part of this Rich Hyper Mafia? Hit me up on Instagram. TRAPNEWS We finna get into California's Mr. Untouchable Underground Empire of George Torres. Let's get into this content. I want no further do's or don'ts, man. This is something a little bit different. Let's see about this guy, man, Mr. Untouchable George Torres. Let's get into this content. Let's go.
On the morning of June 12, 2007, a wealthy Southern Californian man named George Torres woke up in his 6-bedroom, 2-story home in the affluent Los Angeles County city of Arcadia. He got dressed and headed out the door, likely to drive to one of the many grocery stores he'd built from humble beginnings over the past 25 years. If you took a glimpse of California in June 2007, you'd be hard-pressed to find many people whose lives were better off than Torres. At age 50, he was a multi-millionaire with a net worth estimated around $200 million. And he had a reputation as a self-made man who started working menial jobs at age 13 and now walked among LA's most powerful, rich, and famous. But on this day, everything would come crashing down around him. Just a short distance from his home, Torres was pulled over by the FBI. They flashed a warrant for his arrest, cuffed him, and drove him to LA County Jail, where he was placed on an indefinite no-bail hold. The charges were just as shocking as Torres' arrest. He stood accused of racketeering, not for having gang ties per se, but for literally running his grocery business as a front for a massive criminal empire.
Damn, not the numero uno, Marky.
Into the New York City Mafia.
According to this indictment, George Torres is a sinister crime boss. If you're trying to write your own finale to The Sopranos, this indictment might be the place to start.
Within the span of a few hours, Torres had gone from being a success story and embodiment of the American dream to one of the most notorious underworld figures in a land that's known for sophisticated criminal networks just as much as it's known for filmmaking and celebrity gossip. Torres faced a 59-count indictment with co-defendants that included family members, alleged gangsters, and policymakers in Los Angeles. The allegations were inflammatory, transforming the unremarkable day-to-day life of a grocer into something out of a mobster movie script. He was accused of ordering henchmen to steal meat and produce from rival grocery businesses.
Flocking other grocery stores is crazy work.
or beating up another grocery employee for going through his stores and looking at pricing. There were allegations of massive tax fraud, employing and underpaying undocumented immigrants, extorting shoplifters rather than calling the cops on them, and bribing members of the planning commission with Lakers tickets, cars, and jewelry. Of course, he faced murder charges too. According to the feds, Torres was something of a real-life Gus Fring, a mob boss hiding in plain sight as a respected businessman, who often resorted to violence and had hitmen at his beck and call.
I don't know Nacho.
Don't know?
Sorry.
When a member of a local gang shot and killed a security guard at one of his stores, Torres ordered his right-hand man to kill someone in the gang. When
Oh yeah, Torres is over there handling business, bro. He stands on the woo-wops. This is a lot more than your local produce, man.
Sureño gang member appeared at several of Torres's grocery stores claiming to be a Mexican Mafia member and demanding protection money, other grocers might have trembled with fear and gotten out their checkbook. Not George Torres. Just a couple weeks after making the threats, the would-be extortionist was gunned down in broad daylight a short distance from one of Torres's stores. As time went on, people with dirt on Torres, or who'd pissed him off, simply seemed to disappear and never be heard from again. From the defense perspective, this case was a frightening example of how an overzealous LAPD cop named Greg Kading had become so obsessed with taking down Torres that he'd manipulated and relied on completely untrustworthy informants, some of them admitted murderers themselves. Torres wasn't the greedy, short-tempered mafioso the LAPD was making him out to be, but a dogged businessman with an incredible work ethic who was being slandered not because of who he was, but because of where he was from. George Torres was the type of guy who would never forget his roots, who set up businesses in low-income neighborhoods because he'd worked his way up
And they keep showing the numero uno market. I wonder if that's really his market.
from South Central to the top of the pyramid, and wanted to give others a helping hand as well.
So he started up from the bottom up, and he came up, and people didn't like that. You know what I mean? He helped the people around here. What does it say in the...
He hired your son, right?
He hired me too.
He kept his prices cheap. He employed 600 people, many of whom were in dire need of a second chance in life, and the community had his back. Naturally, since he grew up on the streets of LA, he was bound to have a shady associate or two. But that was all a part of his biggest strength. He had respect within Los Angeles' poorest communities, as well as among the millionaire class, and how many others in the so-called City of Angels could say the same? Though there was no sugarcoating the seriousness of this case. If Torres was convicted, he would die in prison, and 2 years later, after a trial that spanned a month, he was in fact convicted of 55 counts, including murder. But as it turned out, Torres' story was far from over. Just weeks before Torres was to be sentenced, to paraphrase legendary LA Dodgers announcer Vin Scully, the impossible happened. There was a Halley's Comet of a legal event that not only exposed corruption on the other side of the law, but turned the entire prosecution upside down and left the feds scratching their heads. In the end, Torres proved that he was California's Mr. Untouchable, a man shrouded in mystery with the ability to go blow for blow with the United States government. Our story begins in western Mexico, where Torres' mother and father worked in farms and orchards before moving to South Central Los Angeles when Torres was just a boy. His father got a job driving a produce truck back and forth between Mexico and California, and it wasn't long before Torres' strong work ethic began to show. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade to help his father at his job.
So bro was really like an immigrant who came in and do what he had to do and then just became like this crazy drug lord.
And watched as his father grew his own business into a company called Crown Produce. In the early 1980s, when his father retired, Torres decided to take a chance and go into the grocery store business. He bought a dilapidated building a few blocks from the University of Southern California and spent $500,000 renovating it into a grocery store. Before long, the market, renamed Numero Uno, was
Damn, so it is, bro. Okay, getting somewhere. If you're from LA, you know about this market.
pulling in up to $750,000 per week, and Torres began expanding the business into a chain, before eventually buying up 3 other supermarket businesses in Southern California. As he reached middle age, Torres owned properties throughout the city, a ranch in Santa Barbara, a private jet service, and was earning $50,000 a week from Numero Uno alone. As Torres's businesses began to grow, another much more sinister multi-billion-dollar industry was gaining steam. As the 70s gave way to the 80s, cocaine started flowing into the United States. And when American drug dealers figured out how to cook it into crack and increase their profits, addiction rates spiked in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., New York City, and other large cities throughout the United States. The drug ruined lives of some and turned a select few into millionaires, like Freeway Ricky Ross, the LA crack emperor who moved metric tons and sold to both the Bloods and the Crips. But while Ross was perhaps the most famous crack cocaine entrepreneur, he was far from the only one. That leads us to the other side of Torres' grocery empire. It turned out that Torres' dad wasn't just a strawberry delivery man. He also owned a brothel in Michoacan, and with that came connections that would benefit the Torres family even decades later in America. Perhaps most notably, it was rumored that a well-known cartel-connected family that made millions trafficking cocaine, the Reynosos, had bankrolled George Torres when he was starting Numero Uno at the Jefferson Street location. Torres was close friends with Rene Cruz Reynoso, who co-owned and operated a produce business that supplied Numero Uno. Rene also smuggled tons of cocaine into the U.S., using boxes of Ariel soap to hide the drugs and throw off police dogs, an effective smuggling route that allowed for cocaine to be brought in by the ton. But Rene's financial success was torpedoed in 1991 when he was indicted in a murder-for-hire plot to kill a Los Angeles developer named Ronald Orden, who'd allegedly discovered one of Rene's associates was a drug dealer. Orden was shot and killed on the Santa Monica freeway by a gunman on a motorcycle, and the driver would later testify Rene paid him $2,000 for his role in the hit. Rene fled to Mexico, but was eventually tracked down, arrested, and convicted. This would mark the first time the feds looked into George Torres, based on his association with the Reynosos. But in what would be a recurring theme, their investigation in the early 1990s came well short of finding enough to file charges. But then, President Bill Clinton, of all people, set off a series of events that ended with the 2007 federal indictment. It all started with a controversial pardon. On January 20th, 2001, the same day he left office, President Bill Clinton commuted the sentence of a convicted drug trafficker named Carlos Viñali, who was serving 14 years for converting 800 pounds of cocaine into crack as a part of a drug ring that operated between California and Minnesota. A Los Angeles native, Viñali was the son of a wealthy real estate developer named Horatio Viñali, and the family's many business ventures included owning car dealerships in the LA area. Horatio was also a close friend of LA County Sheriff Lee Baca. The Carlos Viñali commutation generated extreme controversy, but even more outrage than the GOP-controlled Congress was the FBI, who vowed to go through all of Viñali's associations with a fine-tooth comb and bust him again once and for all. It was during this investigation that Torres' name came up, as he and Horatio Viñali were such close friends that Horatio reportedly introduced Torres to local politicians, including members of LA City Council, the sheriff, and Planning Commissioner Steve Carmona. Carmona would later become part of the federal indictment, on the allegation that Torres bribed him with thousands in gifts in order to secure a liquor license for one of his stores. As the feds continued to dig through Viñali's associations, the Torres probe grew.
So this dude just has a whole lot of stuff going on, bro. It's like he just, let me see, how much time we got this? Okay. He just out here just pretty much causing a mug, bro. Out here just doing his 1-2 step like Sierra. Anybody can get it, however you got to get it, you know what I'm saying? He knocking down other grocery stores like they mob competition. My man is out here living life like it's golden.
Larger and larger, eventually turning into its own investigation, separate from the Viñali probe. That's where LAPD Detective Greg Kading enters our story. Nowadays, he is best known for writing a book that publicly accused Sean Puff Daddy Combs of ordering Tupac Shakur's murder. Back then, Kading was a hungry police investigator on an upward trajectory, and he became obsessed with making the George Torres investigation into the hallmark of his career. Kading worked on prior investigations involving Torres since 1997. He was also a task force agent, giving him broader reach than most LAPD detectives, along with the ability to use federal resources to get what he wanted. With the assistance of the DEA, the FBI, and the ATF, Kading built up sources who were close to Torres. what started to emerge was the picture of a man who had his hands in all sorts of criminal activity, thanks to a network that included large-scale cocaine traffickers, corrupt tax attorneys, and members of subsets of Sureños and Blood's street gangs. But out of everyone in Torres' circle, one person stood out in particular. His name was Ignacio Nacho Mesa. Nacho worked for the Numero Uno Corporation, but he mostly specialized in extracurricular jobs. He operated a car wash called Buckets and a hydraulic shop on property owned by Torres, where one federal informant claimed rapper Be Real of Cypress Hill was seen hanging out. Nacho was also a member of a gang called the Latin Hustlers, and a cocaine trafficker who shipped hundreds of kilos per week and would ask his mother to lock herself in her room as he and his friends cooked cocaine into crack in her kitchen. According to federal informants, Nacho was Torres' protege, and the two had something of a father and son bond. His most important position in Numero Uno, at least according to the FBI, was Torres' go-to hitman, and he was allegedly willing to kill on command. That was evident after April 24th, 1993, when a Numero Uno security guard named Salvador Puga was gunned down outside the supermarket, supposedly by Manuel Wicked Velasco, a teenaged member of a gang called Primera Flats, who was angry with Torres for shorting him on pay after he'd been hired to sweep up trash in front of the store. Many believe that the actual murderer was another Primera Flats member known as Cricket, and that Velasco was covering up for him because he would be sentenced as a juvenile and receive much less prison time. But in any event, it's obvious that the gang was responsible. Torres' response, according to Kading's informants, was to order Nacho to murder one of the gang's members in retaliation. 1 month after Puga was killed, on May 22nd, 1993, Nacho allegedly spotted a Primera Flats member named Edward Carpel and opened fire at him with a .45 caliber automatic weapon from a car being driven by another Latin Hustlers member, Fernando Too Short Villapondo. After the murder, Nacho stashed the gun with a Rolling 20s Bloods member named Derek Bo D. Smith, another man with ties to Numero Uno who'd play a major role in the racketeering case.
Bro, this is like freaking a movie, bro.
Derek Smith was also close with Nacho, as the two were frequently involved in the cocaine industry together. Smith would later be implicated in the 1996 murder of Roderick Chapman, a Bloods member who was in the risky business of robbing drug dealers with both the Bloods and the Crips. In 1996, Chapman reportedly had plans to rob both Nacho and George Torres, but he'd never get the chance. Smith and others lured him to a residence at 802 East 32nd Street, Los Angeles, where he was shot in the head, and his body was dumped at another location.
Damn.
But Smith would never face prosecution. Rather, in the early 2000s, when Smith was serving time for cocaine trafficking, Kading gave him a way out: testify against George Torres. The year after Carpel was killed, another problem arose for Numero Uno, in the form of a Playboys gang member named Jose Shorty Maldonado, who just happened to be close with the Vignali family. Maldonado had been acquainted with George Torres, as the two reportedly went jet skiing and on other excursions together. But in early 1994, Maldonado started poking his head into Numero Uno business, claiming to be part of the Mexican Mafia and demanding regular payments from Torres. While no LA businessman, not even Torres, would want to provoke the powerful Mexican Mafia, Torres didn't immediately buckle. Instead, he allegedly called upon another of his henchmen, Raul Del Real, a close friend and business associate of Nacho, who co-owned the hydraulic shop with him. Del Real, in turn, reached out to Mexican Mafia member Armando Perico Ochoa, who confirmed that Maldonado was acting on his own, not actually as a representative of the prison gang as he claimed. From there,
Bro went rogue.
Maldonado's life was forfeit. On February 9th, 1994, Maldonado and his pregnant girlfriend exited a barbershop near San Pedro and Jefferson in Los Angeles, which was adjacent to both the original Numero Uno store and Nacho's hydraulic shop. They were struck with dozens of bullets fired from an Uzi, equipped with a silencer. Maldonado was killed, but his girlfriend, Ana Vasquez, survived 16 gunshot wounds to her legs. Nacho was later identified as the shooter. Coincidentally, on the day he was killed, Maldonado was driving a Ford Bronco owned by Carlos Viñali. Authorities suspected that Torres was somehow involved in these murders and even launched a second investigation in 1998, dubbed Operation Robin Hood, to once again try to take him down. And again, they came up short of gathering enough to even charge Torres, and Numero Uno kept rolling along unscathed. But that same year, trouble started brewing for the grocery mogul, not due to outside influences, but because of turmoil within his inner circle.
Can you imagine having all this going on and you the nigga that sell produce? It's wild.
Nacho Mesa started using private planes via JetWest to ship 100 kilos of cocaine per week across the country, drugs he was getting from a Numero Uno security guard named Jose Angulo. Nacho had started the JetWest connection from Torres, and sources told the FBI that when Torres found out Nacho had been using his private plane service to ship large amounts of coke, he wasn't exactly thrilled, as he considered it unnecessarily risky. Those concerns were vindicated in late 1997, when federal authorities in Alabama seized $300,000 of suspected drug money from one of Nacho's couriers. This was further exacerbated a few months later, when Derek Smith got busted in Cleveland, transporting 25 kilos for the group. Now, they were close to $1.5 million in the hole, with debts to drug dealers in Los Angeles and Birmingham. Nacho started stressing. He started getting desperate, and his moves got increasingly erratic and ill-advised. Under increasing pressure to pay off his debts, Nacho made a series of epically bad decisions of tragic proportions. First, after learning that Raul Del Real was planning to leave town for a few days, he plotted with Derek Smith to break into Raul's home in Whittier and steal tens of thousands.
Nacho got a lot going on, bro. Not having the best day is what they should call you, bro. Nacho best move.
Of dollars he was sure was hidden inside. Smith recruited members of the All for Crime Bloods, but didn't actually participate in the robbery himself. To pull off the robbery, the group needed to either force or lie their way inside, because while Raul was out of town, his mother was not. The robbers used a white Astro van belonging to Nacho's brother, Jesus Mesa, loaded it with flowers, and tricked Raul's mother into opening the door by claiming they were florists. Once the door was opened, they pulled guns, tied her up, and ransacked the place looking for money. They were unable to locate the stacks of cash they were expecting, and when Raul heard what happened, he immediately suspected Nacho. Despite his outrage, Raul didn't handle the problem himself. Rather, he consulted with Torres, who told him that he was certain Nacho wouldn't do something like that. But that goodwill was about to evaporate. Next, Nacho made possibly the worst decision of his life. He burglarized the Numero Uno on Jefferson Street, stealing an estimated $600,000 to $700,000 from a safe, and entering with
Nigga, $600,000 in a grocery store safe?
the key that Torres had given him years before, on the assumption that Torres would have forgotten Nacho held onto it. Once again, Nacho's confidence was misplaced. People didn't just rob Torres' stores like that. So it was abundantly clear that this was an inside job, and all available information pointed right to Nacho. While the burglary allowed Nacho to pay off most of his debts in LA, his relationship with Torres was permanently fractured from that day on, and his problems were only going to get worse. In July 1998, Nacho and others involved in his cocaine ring were indicted in Alabama on federal charges, facing decades in prison. But Nacho would never get his day in court. According to federal informants, Torres invited him back to work at the store on October 5th, 1998,
Brought him back and they finna close his curtains.
assuring him he'd let bygones be bygones. The next day, Nacho Mesa simply disappeared. His whereabouts are still unknown to this day. The following year, Jose Angulo, the Numero Uno security guard who was supplying Nacho with coke, also vanished off of the face of the earth. Raul would eventually get indicted too, for cocaine trafficking in Baltimore, and in 2005 he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Smith, convicted in 1999, was given 24 years and moved to USP Victorville to serve his term. That gave the feds a way in, dangle a possible sentence reduction for both men, and get them both to snitch on their boss. It would take nearly a decade from Nacho's disappearance until June 2007 before the LAPD and FBI became confident that they could prove what happened to Edward Carpel, Nacho Mesa, and Jose Maldonado. Since the Vignali pardon of 2001, Detective Greg Kading had racked up a list of informants within Torres' inner circle, which included Nacho's brother Jesus, Raul, Derek Smith, and a host of undocumented immigrants who formerly worked at Numero Uno, and who were willing to testify that they were illegally underpaid and that Torres had tried to hide their immigration status from the government. With Torres in jail and his reach on the outside somewhat limited, the feds appeared poised to close the book on Numero Uno once and for all. Torres' trial was set for early 2009, and though his attorneys continued to adamantly proclaim his innocence, Rico charges are a near impossible hurdle to overcome. Torres' March 2009 trial went about how federal authorities expected. Derek Smith and Raul Del Real were star witnesses, and though the defense did everything they could to attack their credibility, it wasn't quite enough. The small good news for Torres was that, in the end, jurors acquitted him of the plot to murder Nacho. But Torres was convicted of murdering Jose Maldonado and 55 other counts ranging from conspiracy to tax fraud. All that was left was for a judge to formally sentence him to life and for the feds to sink their teeth into the $109 million prize money. But one very unexpected thing had happened at the trial. Attorneys played a recorded phone call between Kading and Smith at Victorville Prison, where the detective had uttered the phrase, quote, "We've already talked before about big money." Only, there was nothing in the
Greg Kading is a piece of shit, boy. That's true.
discovery provided to the defense about Kading and Smith ever broaching that subject. And it sounded a hell of a lot like Kading had offered Smith some form of monetary payment to testify. That's when the floodgates opened. Suddenly, federal prosecutors found a trove of calls and reports that, as Judge Gregory Van Tatenhove would later rule, gave the impression Kading was, quote, making promises to the witnesses and, on occasion, making threats to other witnesses. Judge Tatenhove agreed and ordered a Bureau of Prisons official to check for any and all calls between Derek Smith and Kading when Smith was incarcerated at USP Victorville. The judge set a day for the BOP official to testify on his findings, but he'd never get a chance. Before the hearing, the U.S. Attorney's Office stepped in and dismissed all of the RICO charges against Torres.
A judge has tossed out racketeering convictions against the founder of a Southern California grocery store chain. George Torres, founder of Numero Uno stores, was released from jail after federal prosecutors discovered a jailhouse recording that may clear him of charges that he ordered a rival killed. He was released on $1 million bond after the judge threw out racketeering and conspiracy convictions.
In light of their decision, Tatenhove issued a 147-page order where he absolutely ripped into the prosecution and Kading and ordered a new trial on all counts. He wrote, quote, "The court is disturbed by the government's conduct in this case, especially with regard to how the agents handled the key witnesses on the murder predicates." And with that, George Torres became one of the only people to ever first lose a RICO case, then snatch victory from the jaws of defeat when all hope for acquittal seemed lost. He was released from jail, and after some negotiating, agreed to plead guilty to a single count of tax fraud. He was sentenced to time already served, and he went back to the life he'd enjoyed before the feds pulled him over on that June morning in 2007. Case closed.
Hey, that's a lot for a dude.
Detective Greg Kading never fully lived down the George Torres debacle. Around the same time as the Torres investigation, Kading was given the third rail of all murder cases in Los Angeles, the notorious BIG murder investigation, which led Kading down an equally epic path that ended with his conclusion that a Crip named Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was the last living person involved in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Kading left the LAPD and wrote a book on his findings, in which he portrayed himself as the lone detective in a backwards police force willing to do what it took to expose Tupac's true killers. In his book, Kading also took time to explain what went wrong in the Torres investigation, but he maintained that he'd been made a scapegoat for a case that went terribly awry due to Tatenhove's misgivings about the RICO statute. Kading admitted that he'd been, quote, careless in drafting search warrant affidavits that left him vulnerable to attacks, but that Tatenhove overturned the case on a, quote, legal technicality, and that Kading's reputation had been, quote, collateral damage. As for Torres, his current whereabouts aren't publicly known, but the tax conviction wasn't enough to initiate deportation proceedings on him. So it's likely that he remains in the United States. One thing's for sure, though. The man once dubbed by the media as the Al Capone of Arcadia is no longer in the grocery business, at least as far as Numero Uno is concerned. As the case progressed, the business was sold off piece by piece. But while Torres is no longer at the helm of the LA grocery chain he built, the stores all remain to this day, including the one on Jefferson Street that became the focal point of one of the biggest Rico debacles in American history.
All right, man. Y'all know the deal. It was red dots to the left. You know the rest. That was an interesting situation. News you could use? Not a dream thing in nobody's college. Free Avenue Agents, so he's free. We are